I remember the first time I truly recognized that I was running away from my feelings. It was a bright autumn morning. The kind that makes you nostalgic for no reason at all. There was a crispness in the air. And the leaves were falling, painting the streets in shades of orange and gold. As beautiful as everything around me was, I could feel the weight of something unspoken pressing down on me. The subtle tension I had learned to carry with me everywhere I went. I didn't know it at the time, but I had spent years avoiding it. I had been moving through life as if everything was fine. Like nothing was wrong. Keeping up appearances in my small circle. Friends. Family. Work, all of it demanded a version of me that I could wear like a mask. There were no major breakdowns. No dramatic moments to signal that something was off. But underneath, I felt disconnected. It wasn't obvious to others because I had mastered the art of holding it together. I kept myself busy. Threw myself into work. Said all the right things when necessary. But internally, it was different. I was running. Not physically, but emotionally. Mentally. I was retreating from something I couldn't quite name. I think it started long before that autumn day. Perhaps as early as childhood. My upbringing wasn't traumatic by any means. But it wasn't idyllic either. It was an ordinary home. In a modest neighborhood. With ordinary problems. The kind of problems no one talks about openly because they're too small to justify complaints but big enough to leave a mark on your soul. I had two loving parents who did their best. But they were also emotionally distant in their own ways. My father believed in keeping things practical. Never dwelling on emotions. Always pushing forward. My mother was nurturing but overwhelmed by her own unresolved past. It left me in a peculiar space. One where I learned that feelings were to be either solved or ignored. Not explored. If you can't fix it, then push it down and keep going. That's the lesson I learned without ever being told directly. As I grew older, this pattern of avoidance became second nature. Whenever a situation became too complicated or a feeling too overwhelming, I would step back. Retreat. Shut down. Sometimes it looked like distraction, working late nights or filling my weekends with plans that left no time for introspection. Other times it manifested in avoidance, dodging uncomfortable conversations. Pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. Avoiding conflict because it was easier than confronting the discomfort. I remember one specific moment when I realized just how deep this pattern ran. I was in my mid-20s. A couple of years into my career. Things were going well on the surface. I had just gotten a promotion. Was renting a nice apartment downtown. And on paper, everything looked good. But internally, I was restless. There was an emptiness I couldn't shake. A gnawing feeling that something was missing. But I couldn't put my finger on it. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I came home and sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling. It was late. The apartment was quiet. And for the first time in a long while, I had nothing to distract me. As the silence grew louder, I felt an unexpected wave of sadness wash over me. I wasn't sure why. But I knew that something had been building up inside me for a long time. I wanted to cry. But the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt numb. Frozen in place by the weight of my own suppressed emotions. I didn't do anything about it that night. I went to bed, hoping sleep would drown out the unease. And the next morning I went to work as usual. I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself I was just tired. That it was nothing. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was the beginning of an unraveling. The first crack in the facade I had built for so long. That crack widened over the next few months. Little things that I had once brushed off began to weigh on me. I found myself becoming more irritable. More withdrawn. I started to pull away from people. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to show up fully. I had always been the reliable one. The person others could count on. But now, I couldn't even rely on myself. And then came the incident that made everything come crashing down. It was a trivial argument with a friend. Something so insignificant that it wouldn't even register in most people's lives. But for me, it was a tipping point. She had asked me why I had been so distant lately. And instead of admitting that I had been struggling, I snapped at her. I don't even remember what I said. But it was sharp. Cutting. And unlike me, the look on her face as she stood there, stunned, was enough to shatter me. I felt terrible. But instead of apologizing, I shut down completely. I didn't talk to her for weeks after that. I avoided her texts, dodged invites to hang out, and withdrew even further into myself. It was easier to retreat than to confront the hurt I had caused, both to her and to myself. Easier to pretend that it didn't matter than to face the fact that I had let her down. And in doing so, let myself down too. I think that's the thing about retreating. It feels safer in the moment. It feels like a way to protect yourself from the messiness of emotions, from the discomfort of facing what's really going on. But the truth is, retreating doesn't protect you. It isolates you. It leaves you alone with the very feelings you're trying to avoid. Only now they've grown bigger, more insistent, more suffocating. I wish I could say that I learned my lesson right then and there. But I didn't. I continued to run for a while longer, retreating into my work, into distractions, into anything that kept me from having to sit with myself. But the cracks kept widening. And eventually, there was no more space to run. The real turning point came one afternoon when I was visiting my parents. It was a quiet day, much like the one I had spent years earlier, when I first started noticing the weight I was carrying. My father was sitting in his armchair, watching the news, and my mother was in the kitchen, humming softly as she cooked. Everything seemed so normal, so mundane. But there was something about that moment that broke me wide open. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt this overwhelming urge to cry. Not just cry, but sob. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, and locked the door behind me. As soon as I was alone, the tears came, pouring out of me in a way they hadn't in years. I cried for everything, for the years of pretending, for the distance I had created between myself and the people I loved, for the ways I had let myself down. It wasn't a pretty cry. It was raw, messy, and painful. But it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running. I was feeling everything I had been avoiding for so long. And it hurt like hell. But in that hurt, there was also a strange sense of relief. As if finally allowing myself to feel was the first step toward healing. That day marked the beginning of a long process of confronting the emotions I had been running from. It wasn't easy. And it didn't happen overnight. There were many moments when I wanted to retreat again, to fall back into old patterns of avoidance. But I knew that if I did, I would only be delaying the inevitable. I started therapy soon after that. It was hard at first, sitting in a room with a stranger, talking about things I had never even admitted to myself. But over time, it became easier. I began to understand that the feelings I had been running from weren't as scary as I had thought. They were just feelings. After all, they couldn't hurt me unless I let them fester, unless I kept running from them. Through therapy, I also learned that retreating wasn't just about avoiding pain. It was about avoiding vulnerability. I had spent so much of my life trying to appear strong, trying to be the person who had it all together, that I had forgotten how to be vulnerable, how to let others see me in my messiness, in my hurt. But vulnerability, I came to realize, wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. It was the key to real connection, both with others and with myself. I wish I could say that I never retreated again after that. But the truth is, I still do sometimes. Old habits die hard. And there are still moments when it feels easier to shut down than to confront what's really going on. But now, I catch myself. I recognize the patterns. And instead of retreating completely, I try to sit with the discomfort, to allow myself to feel whatever is coming up, even when it's hard. I think that's the real lesson I've learned through all of this, that retreating doesn't solve anything. It only prolongs the pain. The only way to truly heal, to truly grow, is to confront your feelings head on, to sit with them, to let them move through you. It's not easy, and it's not always pretty, but it's the only way forward. I'm still learning, still growing, still figuring it all out, but I'm no longer running. And that, I think, is enough.